January 17, 2013, 2:17 p.m., Spokane Valley, Washington. The house held its breath when Linda Carver turned the brass knob to her daughter's room. For 3 months she told neighbors the coroner was right, that grief would quiet if you boxed it up. But something in this hallway never stopped watching her. What happened to Elise Carver, 22, bright and stubborn, on an ordinary October night? 9 years later, a forgotten detail will force the case open, and the story you're about to hear will not sit still. One tilted frame will turn memory into a witness. The cold came through the window seams and settled on Linda's skin. Winter light sat thin on the carpet, the color of old paper. Elise's bedspread wasn't made, only pulled up halfway like she'd stepped out for water and forgot to come back. The shampoo scent lingered, clean, a little sweet, refusing to let the calendar win. Linda set a stack of folding boxes on the floor and told herself to breathe. One box for class notes. One for clothes she could donate. One for the things that didn't fit anywhere. She needed actions with clear edges. Rules she could survive. She started with the easy shelf. A mug with an uneven handle from a pottery class. A planner with tidy handwriting that unraveled in late September. Receipts clipped together by habit. The ordinary weight of a life stopped mid-stride. She worked quietly, counting items she couldn't name out loud, listening for footsteps that would not return. A siren flared far off on Sprague Avenue and faded. Somewhere a mail truck braked, hissed, moved on. The house stayed quiet. By the second box, Linda's fingers shook. Jeans still held Elise's shape. A gray sweater had one pulled thread near the cuff where she always worried the yarn during phone calls. Linda pressed it to her face and found herself sinking. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed and let the room waver. Her throat closed. She swallowed the kind of breath that scorches on the way in. It passed. She stood again because standing was a decision. She reached for the mirror to angle it toward the light so she could check the back of the desk for dust. The mirror skidded against the wall and clicked. An odd, thin sound, like plastic against drywall. Linda paused, hands splayed flat against the glass. She felt warmth that didn't belong in a cold room. A faint tackiness where tape had been pulled and pressed again. The kind of detail you miss until it touches the skin that remembers. She lifted the frame carefully, expecting nothing and bracing anyway, and saw the unfamiliar shape fixed to the backing where it should be. Her stomach went cold in the ribs. Her mind said no before her eyes finished reading yes. She didn't scream. She didn't call anyone. She took the object off the backing with steady fingers, pin by pin, tape by tape, the way you take a splinter without breaking it. It was light. It was warm. She pressed her thumb to a small button because old habits of office work die hard. A speckled light winked once, then went still. The room seemed to tilt. Linda set the thing on the dresser, palms flat on the wood, and counted. 1 to 5. 5 to 1. On the wall, a calendar from a Spokane charity still showed October 2012, a month she had folded and refolded until the edges gave way. She took it downstairs like contraband. In the kitchen, the laptop waited where she paid bills late at night and reread old emails until sleep took pity. She slid a chair out without letting it scrape. The heating kicked on with a metal sigh. Outside, a crow shouted from a fir tree and something answered, bored and territorial. Linda connected the smallest piece first, a memory card no bigger than a thumbnail. The computer recognized it with a cheerful chime that felt obscene. Folders bloomed on the screen. Dates stacked in gray lines, July, August, September, October, marching toward the week everything broke. She hovered the cursor. No one else was in the house. Greg wouldn't be home for hours. He had offered to do this part for her, bag things up, spare her the wait, but she'd said no because some jobs belong to the people who loved you first. She clicked. A still image opened. Elise's room from an angle Linda had never stood at. The bed. The desk. The window that stuttered winter light. Sound came on next. A soft door. The scrape of a backpack zipper. Elise stepped into view at 4:23 p.m., shoulders drawn up as if bracing for wind. She sat on the mattress and held her face in both hands the way she had as a child when the world pressed too close. A floorboard somewhere off camera creaked. The doorway filled with a shape. Greg's voice was soft, practical. "You doing okay?" The words were ordinary. The room made them something else. Linda watched the line of Elise's spine go rigid. She watched the conversation that had never been hers repeat with the same comfort and the same threat, layered in a tone that fit neither category. She watched her own kitchen clock crawl toward the hour when tires would turn into the driveway, when the day would pretend to be normal again. She stopped the video and pushed the laptop back as if it could bite. The house hummed and clicked. The heat shut off and the silence after was louder. This was evidence, she thought, and then hated the word for what it implied. Elise wasn't a case. She was her daughter. But the screen didn't care what Linda wanted to call it. It offered timestamps, angles, routine. She breathed through the ache until her hands could move again. She closed the program, popped the card out, and slid it into her pocket, where the sharp edge pressed a small moon into her palm. Upstairs, the room still waited, neat and cruel. Linda climbed the steps, slow, careful on the third tread that always complained. She went to the bed and lifted one corner of the mattress, fingers working blind in the dark seam. Something crinkled. Paper thick with ink and handling, edges rounded by fear. She drew out a stack bound with a tired rubber band. Elise's handwriting ran straight at first, then tipped and hurried, a voice trying to outrun itself. In the hallway, the late afternoon dimmed to an early evening that smelled faintly of snow. Linda turned the first page and knew the night would not end the way it began. She froze when the front door latch clicked downstairs. A familiar key. A cheerful whistle. Shoes on hardwood, steady, unhurried, right on time. A voice called her name with practiced warmth and floated up the stairwell as if nothing in the world had changed. Her hand tightened on the pages until the rubber band snapped, and papers flared in her grip like white birds startled from a ledge. Somewhere in the house, a small red light remembered what it had seen. One line in that journal will burn through his alibi. Linda didn't turn on the lights. Darkness made the pages louder. The stack she'd pulled from under Elise's mattress trembled in her hands, the rubber band snapped and curled like a dead vein on the carpet. The handwriting felt like breath, steady at first, then rushing, then jagged as if the pen had struck ice. She read one line, then another, each sentence pulling a stitch in the version of events she'd used to stay upright since October. Greg's tread on the front steps froze her. The key slid, the latch lifted, and his cheerful whistle floated down the hall as if nothing in the world had teeth. She palmed her phone. Reflex more than plan. The voice memo app opened without sound, the red circle glowing like a heartbeat she could control. She tucked the phone in her cardigan pocket, screen facing out, microphone up. A page in the journal described a conversation she'd never heard, a hand on a shoulder too long, a rule repeated, "Don't trouble your mother." In the margin, Elise had written the same word 3 times and underlined it twice. Enough. Linda closed her eyes until the buzzing in her ears cleared. She breathed once, counted, and kept reading. "Linz." Greg called from the kitchen. "You home?" His shoes found the step that always complained, then the next. She gathered the papers into a neat, incriminating stack and stood. He appeared in the doorway with a grocery bag and an easy smile, the kind that made neighbors trust him with spare keys. His eyes flicked to the bed, the boxes, her hands. The smile did not move. "You started without me," he said lightly. "I would have helped." "I needed to do it," she answered. Her voice sounded careful, the way people carry glass. He set the bag down and came in as if the room still belonged to ordinary time. "You okay?" he asked, stepping closer, reading her face like a schedule. "You look pale." "I found some things." Linda lifted the top page of the journal. "Elise wrote about you." Not an accusation. A statement. Let the air take sides. Greg's expression paused a fraction, then recalculated into concern. "She wrote about everything," he said gently. "You know how she was. Overthinks. Big feelings. We both tried, Linda. Sometimes people decide their own exits." She didn't look away. "She mentions your office," she said softly, "and late nights. And a note on your computer." The last words landed and stayed. He smiled again, thinner. "I've told you, when you're ready, we can sort her files together. It's messy in there. You don't need to see that kind of mess. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A simple check-in, the kind he sent before sunrise or after long shifts. You good? Need anything? She typed without lifting the screen from the fabric, letting the keyboard memory do the work. All good. Can you swing by? Forgot that wrench. The code had lived between them since childhood. A tool that didn't exist was a door that needed opening. She hit send. Then she folded a page so the crease ran clean, and asked the question she had avoided since the calendar broke. Did you know about a camera in her room? Silence arrived like a person. Greg's jaw moved once. What camera? He said, unbothered. The word what hung too empty. The one that saw angles no one should see, Linda said, the sentence steady, almost clinical. With dates. With times. The sound of the furnace starting downstairs made the next second feel crowded. Greg's hand closed on the doorframe until the knuckles whitened, then released. You should rest, he said. Grief is tricky. It rearranges details. Makes you think there's a pattern where there isn't. Linda held up the journal. This isn't a pattern, she said. It's a record. She set the stack on the dresser with deliberate care, a small ceremony that made them real. Greg stepped closer, and his voice dropped into a register neighbors never heard. Think about the last 3 months, he murmured. Think about how hard you fought to keep breathing. You want to do that alone? Or you want me on your side? I want the truth on my side. She did not move. The stillness in the room sharpened. A muscle pulsed in his cheek. You're making dangerous interpretations, he said, not angry, not kind. People say things in journals they don't mean. They see shadows and call them men. You could ruin what's left of your life chasing shadows. A car door thumped outside. Boots on the walkway. Nate never knocked twice. Greg heard it too. Something in his face blurred, then hardened. His hand lifted toward her sleeve, not a strike, more a test of distance, and Linda stepped back a half inch he could not pretend not to see. The space between them learned a new language. Footsteps hit the hall. Linz. Nate called, voice louder than he meant, already reading weather through drywall. Greg's gaze slid to the papers, to the phone in her pocket, to the door. Linda moved first. In here, she said, and the words broke the room's seal. Nate took in the bruise rising pale on her throat where Greg's fingers had brushed too long, the torn rubber band on the floor, the stack of pages that looked like testimony even without a stamp. Everything okay? Nate asked, but he was already angling his body to the space between them. Linda reached for his forearm, not to hide, but to anchor. I found what I needed to see, she said. And I heard enough. Greg lifted his palms a few inches as if calming a skittish animal. Let's not overreact, he said. We can sit. We can go through things slowly. His tone was measured, reasonable, the place where threats live comfortably. Linda pulled her phone from her pocket and ended the recording with her thumb. I'm not overreacting, she said. I'm calling. She dialed 3 numbers she wished she'd dialed in October, and the line picked up with a voice that made rooms feel solid. If careful work like this matters to you, stay with us, because the smallest object left behind is about to shift the floor under everyone's feet. One more voice in Elisa's room hadn't been heard yet, and it was stored where no one had thought to look. Detective Maria Alvarez arrived with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd worn out the word routine on cases that never were. She took Linda's statement in the living room while Nate paced a line into the rug. The questions were simple and terrible. When did you find the device? What exactly did you hear? Who had a key? Linda answered with the steadiness people mistake for strength. Alvarez's pen moved, times, angles, distances, then stopped on the bruise rising on Linda's neck where Greg's hand had lingered pretending to reassure. She didn't prod, she photographed. Evidence doesn't need adjectives. Upstairs, Alvarez went methodical. She photographed the mirror frame, the tape residue, the corridor of dust where the device had been pressed flush. She bagged the micro SD and the warm battery separately. Prints off the dresser. Fibers from the carpet. She showed Linda how to fold the journal pages into numbered envelopes with gloved hands, each crease a way of telling the future chain of custody that care had been taken. When she asked to see Greg's office, Linda unlocked the door to a room she'd always avoided for the same reason you don't open a wound twice. The office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and printer heat. Alvarez didn't sit. She worked the perimeter, then the desk, then the tower. The monitor awoke to a login that wasn't locked out long. A directory opened on the last path used, the screen filling with thumbnails and file names that made the air thin. Adults? Yes. No minors. The content itself stayed unplayed. This wasn't the place for that. But the pattern broadcast itself without sound. Hidden angles, glass reflections, someone who preferred to collect control disguised as observation. Alvarez slid past the images and into text. Message threads. Forum handles that pasted professionalism over something predatory. Notes about rapport and buy-in and don't escalate when affection performs better. In a calendar app, a reminder for a meeting at a bar near Liberty Lake with a woman recently divorced, a note about her grown daughter, independent, better leverage as helper. Alvarez's jaw ticked once. She printed the calendar detail to a PDF and saved an image of the open folder to an evidence drive while Nate stood in the doorway clenching and unclenching his fists. The first call came while they were still bagging cables. A known number. A male voice, casual, older, with a patient drawl that tried to sound like a neighbor asking if you needed your driveway plowed. He asked for G, said he'd be ready to clean up loose ends by week's end. When Linda said he had the wrong number, the man chuckled like they were sharing a small joke. "Tell him we can't babysit anxiety," he said, then hung up. Alvarez didn't chase the line. She noted the time, pulled the phone records authorization from her folder, and moved Linda and Nate out of the house within the hour. Coeur d'Alene was winter sharp and quiet. The safe house was the kind of single story you forget after you pass it, windows unremarkable, mailbox clean. Inside, the furnace hummed with a confidence Linda envied. Alvarez made calls to the county, then to someone whose voice softened when she said her name, Special Agent Lauren Pike, Crimes Against Children Unit, but with a portfolio that had bled outward into coercion and exploitation of adults where power and grooming walked the same route. Pike listened, asked 3 questions with more weight than 20 normal ones, and said she was driving from Spokane that night. They drank stale coffee at the kitchen table while the world shrank to the perimeter and the next sound. Pike arrived with a hard case, a laptop, and the kind of steadiness that makes people tell the truth because lying feels exhausting in the same room. She asked to see everything. Alvarez laid it out like a map. The mirror device. Chart. The journal pages. The voice memo Linda recorded without quite knowing why. Pike didn't touch anything for a minute. She just looked, letting the arrangement talk. "People who do this don't trust chance," Pike said finally. "They leave redundancies. Sometimes their targets do too." The sentence slid a latch in Linda's mind. She stood so fast the kitchen chair squealed. Elise was careful in ways Linda had called anxious, then apologized for calling anxious. She thought of the tidy handwriting, the way her daughter labeled cables, the screws that never tightened on the bedroom vent because the metal was soft and old and Elise had asked twice for a repair Linda never scheduled. They drove back under escort. The house felt emptied of its old sound. Linda went straight to the vent behind the headboard and knelt, fingers pressing along the paint line until she found the slight give where the screw heads had been turned and turned but never bit. Nate brought a butter knife from the kitchen. Alvarez took over before the metal could warp. The grill lifted with a tired sigh. Dust coated the duct, gray and ordinary. And there it was, tucked in a fold of the insulation with a patience that made Linda's throat close. A small digital recorder, tape over its logo, battery door scuffed, the red LED long cold. Pike placed it on a folded towel like it could bruise. She didn't plug it into the laptop on the bed. She used a right blocker on the kitchen table where there was light and space and quiet. The recorder mounted like it had been waiting for the one person who would listen all the way. 23 files. Dates spanning late summer to the week before October burned a hole. The first clip opened with static and the soft rasp of Elise whispering the date and the words, "He thinks I'm asleep." Then a different voice cut the room in half. "Older. Southern. Morrissey will take it from here if you can't keep it neat," the voice said. Another voice, Greg's, lower, almost deferential, "I'm not new at this." The first voice didn't laugh this time. Then stopped sounding like it. Alvarez looked up. Pike stopped writing. Linda pressed her palm to the table until the wood print quivered through her skin. Elise had not been paranoid. She had been precise. And somewhere east, a man with a name had just walked into their case without taking off his shoes. Say one name once, and watch how fast a quiet house becomes a staging ground. The visitor room was the color of hospital walls and held the same lie. If everything looks clean, nothing terrible can happen here. Linda sat where Agent Lauren Pike told her to sit, back to the camera, wire taped flat beneath a sweater she no longer recognized as hers. Detective Maria Alvarez watched from the adjacent room, headphones on, pen still. Greg Sutter shuffled in with county-issue composure, orange jumpsuit neat, cuffs quiet, smile almost embarrassed on his face as if they were about to compare calendars rather than histories. He greeted her like a neighbor at a mailbox. The sound didn't fit the air. He opened with concern, a paler version of the tone he used to soften sharp edges. Had she eaten? Was she sleeping? He kept his questions short and shaped to be harmless. Linda answered just enough to keep him talking. The wire slept under her collarbone, but she could feel it listening, warm and patient. Greg's eyes moved, cataloging, the way men do when they've built their lives around knowing what the room will give them. He leaned in an inch. "You didn't have to come," he said. "You could have just remembered me the way we were." "What were we?" she asked steady, because Elise wrote down a different answer. He loved the sound of his own control. You could hear it even when he tried to hide it. He called Elise impulsive. He called Linda brave. He called his forum messages fictional experiments, posturing, nothing more. It was script until it wasn't. Linda set her phone on the table face down but close, the way you do when you want someone to see an option. "A man on our phone left a name," she said softly. "He said, Morrissey." He sounded like he'd been here before. A hairline crack traced across Greg's mask. He exhaled once, tight. "You're talking to people who don't care what they break," he said, which wasn't a denial. Linda didn't blink. "You're in a place where silence won't save you," she told him. "They're worried you'll start saying the wrong things. Say them here instead." She let a beat pass. "Give me a name that saves somebody else." He was a man who loved leverage enough to confuse it with safety. The silence stretched. In the observation room, Alvarez felt Pike's attention sharpen without looking. Greg's gaze dropped to Linda's wrists, where the tape rash from the wire had left faint lines. He nodded once, like he had decided the game. "Ethan Morrissey," he said, brightening as if he'd remembered a fact from a test. "Knoxville. He coordinates when a situation needs to be managed." He rolled the word like a coin on his tongue. Another name followed, West Portland, the owner of a studio that rented props to college bands. Another, Bozeman, a man who made a living fixing things behind retail counters. Common lives with uncommon residue. Greg described a bar in Spokane Valley where introductions happened at the end of trivia nights, when everyone clapped for strangers and forgot the tab. Pike wrote and confirmed in real time with a team already working tower pings, bank logs, plate readers. The pattern stepped forward as if relieved to be recognized. Greg shifted into a softer pitch, like confession was intimacy rather than inventory. "You think I'm the worst thing that happened to you," he said. "You're wrong." He smiled at his hands, small and pleased. "It's a machine, Linda, built over years. You don't stop machines. You stop them one moving part at a time," she said. "You start with the ones that squeak." His mouth flinched. The old reflex to reward defiance with charm twitched and died. "They won't like that I'm here," he said finally. "They won't like that you're useful." He glanced toward the glass where he knew a mirror watched. "They will change how they call each other. They will change where they keep things." "Then we're right on time," she said, and felt the wire like a nerve. He wasn't done. Some men can't stand not owning the final word, even when it's a brick that helps wall them in. He gave her routes, not just names. A storage unit off Trent Avenue paid in cash every quarter, under a shell company that sold reclaimed fixtures. A bank in Coeur d'Alene where a safety deposit box had been opened with a second ID last spring. A note that someone named R. would pick up out-of-state phones at a kiosk near the Spokane Intermodal Center, one at a time, if the store clerk was the right one. The more he said, the more he believed he was still directing traffic. In the other room, Pike's team stacked locations until the map looked like it had been hiding in plain sight. At the end, Greg leaned back like he'd earned something. "I'll want a deal," he said. "I can help you keep the headlines clean." Linda remembered Elise's careful hands, the way she labeled chords with clear tape, the way she refused to rush even when late. "There won't be clean," she told him. "There will be accurate." She stood, and the chair legs quivered against the tile. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the vent pushing processed air into a place where people boxed their choices and watched them settle. Back in the hall, Pike stripped the wire with the tenderness of unwrapping a bandage. "You did exactly what we needed," she said. "Exactly." Alvarez was already dispatching to the storage unit, the bank, the kiosk, calls stacking on calls, warrants flowing in the wake of what had just changed. Linda leaned against the cinder block and let the chill bite her arms until the heat felt earned. She could see Elise, half smile, chin tilted, telling her mother things she had not wanted to carry. It would not remake October, but it would change the direction of January. By dusk, a judge had approved 4 locations, and a 5th sat on a clerk's desk as the lights dimmed. Nate texted a single line, "Proud of you," and a photo of a wrench he actually owned this time, the steel bright under shop light. The world had a shape again, and it included work she could do. She closed her eyes, exhaled, and when she opened them, Pike was already moving toward the next door. What they found in the first box wouldn't just name men, it would name the order in which they fell. They hit all 4 sites before noon and a 5th before the clerk finished lunch. Warrants rolled down like a zipper closing. On Trent Avenue, the storage unit door rattled up to reveal rows of bankers' boxes and a steel cabinet with a second lock, the paint scratched where someone nervous had practiced getting it right. Detective Alvarez moved first, camera up, inventory clean. Inside the cabinet, envelopes sat in a sequence no one bothered to disguise, dates, nicknames, payment stubs with cash deposits that never touched a payroll. A ledger written in small, precise handwriting tracked favors traded for silence, and next to it, a laminated card with a phone tree that crossed area codes like fishing line. No single page broke the machine. Together, they drew it. Across the state line, a bank manager in Coeur d'Alene slid a safety deposit box onto a velvet pad with the helplessness of someone who had followed rules until the rules met a larger plan. Agent Lauren Pike's team filmed as the lid lifted. The box held a portable drive wrapped in aluminum foil, 2 prepaid phones sealed in anti-static bags, and a single Polaroid of a bar's back booth at closing, empty but for a tide mark where a glass had sweated through a trivia night. Notes on the back labeled faces that weren't in frame. Will pick up when the clerk with the nose ring works Tuesdays, one line read in a neat hand. Pike smiled without mirth. The map of an ordinary town had learned to speak in code. In Portland's west side, a studio that rented props to bands turned out to stock more than smoke machines and thrift couches. Behind a false wall, shelves held drives with identical serial stickers and a handwritten index that would fit in a pocket. In Bozeman, a repair counter that fixed anything that plugged in bulk-ordered parts no one in town had requested. Knoxville's phone lit up like a signal fire the moment the first door lifted. Ethan Morrissey wasn't home. He was in a rented garage 2 streets over, where a car battery on a workbench kept one device warm through winter and another ready to move. He answered the knock with a shrug that said he'd expected a lesser god. None of it was cinematic. It was patient work. Numbers confirming routes. Small lies failing when placed alongside other small lies. Pike stacked affidavits until a prosecutor could breathe in full sentences. Alvarez stood in a hallway with a clipboard and did the most radical thing a detective can do, refuse to hurry when everything begged for drama. By dusk, 12 addresses had been searched. 7 people were in cuffs. 3 more waited on morning judges. The headlines had already been written in someone's head. The team kept writing chain of custody instead. Linda learned it in fragments. A call from Pike with 3 words, "Box was good," and then a longer one, "We have a structure now." Nate texted photos he took of nothing particular, the hood of his truck under shop light, his thumb clean of grease, as if to say he was where he said he'd be. She sat at the safe house kitchen table and opened the journal again because grief and resolve share the same posture. The entries read like a preface to the day they were having, not just a record of what had been. Elise had instructed the future without asking permission. It made the room feel steadier. The charges came next, not as a single hammer but as a sequence that built its own weight. Conspiracy, coercion and extortion, stalking with a device, witness intimidation, financial crimes braided through the rest like wire, a RICO count that didn't need theatrics to land, an enterprise with roles, rules, redundancies. Greg Sutter's attorney offered a trade, then another. The best he got was time in a sealed room with people who never promised what they didn't intend to keep. In 2013, indictments arrived on a schedule that suggested the clock had always been theirs. In 2014, a jury took its time and returned with an answer that matched the work: guilty, guilty, guilty. Greg lost the case he'd thought he could narrate. Afterward, the noise changed tone. Reporters wanted a single sentence that would carry a week. Linda declined most of them. She spoke when it mattered, and when she did, she chose verbs over adjectives. She worked with Alvarez and Pike to write what they called the Elise Protocol, a slim, brutal manual on practical safety in ordinary houses. How to signal for help without words, how to double store evidence, digital with physical, on person with offsite, how to write timelines that hold in court, how to breathe when someone says your version of events is a storm of imagination. The protocol was not a monument. It was a wrench meant for hands. Years later, 2021 into 2022, the story sat differently in her chest. The trials had ended. Some men lived in beige cinderblock and controlled nothing but mirrors. Some towns learned to ask better questions when charisma bought coffee. Some neighbors traded pity for vigilance. In the quiet of an afternoon, Linda took the portable drive from the safe house drawer where it stayed between consultations and brought it to Pike, who had never stopped tending the garden of unfinished edges. Technology had outrun an old encryption. A folder opened that no one had opened before. Inside were logs that mapped not just people but order, who called whom first, which nights moved risk, why Tuesdays mattered. She watched Pike's eyes track the screen and knew that the work wasn't just arresting men, it was bankrupting their methods. One line in those logs placed a familiar name in a place he had sworn he never visited. The decrypted logs didn't shout. They murmured order into a story that had lived on tone. Agent Lauren Pike scrolled line by line while the safe house hummed and Spokane's winter pressed its forehead to the glass. Each call had a note, each transfer a quiet purpose. Tuesday pickups. Trivia night huddles. Payments masked as reimbursements for errands. One entry sat like a knife in a drawer. A transfer from Greg Sutter's account, dated 2 days after October, memo hardware, routed to a Knoxville shell that answered to Morrissey's hand. He had sworn he never sent a dime. The ledger didn't argue. It just kept the date. Pike's team moved without noise. A kiosk clerk at the intermodal center, small talking phones to cash, turned out to be the R in the notes. Ray Delaney, part-time electronics counterman, off-duty security contractor, the kind of presence you stop seeing because he's taken the name tag off. He didn't run. He watched the arrest come toward him and put his palms on the counter like he was ready to accept a package. In the back room, a tub of cheap flip phones, a sleeve of new SIMs, a legal pad with hand-drawn stars next to Tuesdays. On page 3, 3 initials formed a triangle that squared the calls. The case gained corners you could grab. In Knoxville, Ethan Morrissey stalled as long as men do when they forget the wind is stronger than their posture. He asked for coffee and got none. He asked for a story and wrote one down that contradicted the logs in the ways that mattered. A storage drive in his rented garage held videos that never had to be played and message archives already matched to the spoken folders. He wasn't loud. He was busy. He'd been the part that says, "We have protocols," and now his protocols sat in bags with evidence stickers and dates that blistered the old denials. Back home, Linda learned to speak in the language of aftermath. She learned how to leave rooms before fatigue made decisions for her. She learned the exact way a courtroom's air thins when a verdict enters ahead of the jury. In 2014, when Greg sat in a suit cut to say he respected institutions, she watched 12 people read weeks of careful labor into one syllable that counted 3 times. He stared at the table because the wall would have given him back a face he could practice. She didn't look. She had lived too long being told to imagine doubt. She chose to imagine work. The Elise protocol left the printer as a stack of plain pages and became something passed hand to hand in community rooms and church basements. It asked ordinary people to do specific things. Write dates. Make copies. Tell one person who can carry a copy you cannot. Decide on a sentence that means come now and teach it to someone who won't ask questions before they move. The calls Linda took changed. Less, what do I do, and more, here's what I have. She could hear Elise in the verbs. She could hear her daughter's stubborn precision turning into a tool that didn't require anyone to be brave at the perfect time, just steady at the right one. In 2021 and into 2022, Spokane breathed differently. Neighbors who had once described Greg as helpful learned a less glamorous math. The one where a smile is data but not proof, where proof lives in patterns, where patterns are made by women who keep writing in the face of being told to rest. Linda kept meeting with Pike because the work never promised to be done. Some men from the original 12 filed appeals. Paper moved, and paper answered. One afternoon, a young woman arrived at a community center with a zip bag of receipts, a thumb drive, and a notebook that began with a grocery list and turned into a clear timeline. I wasn't sure, she told Linda, and then I read your thing and decided being sure could come later. They called Alvarez. The notebook's dates landed. An arrest followed that didn't require anyone to be a hero. When winter finally loosened and the light came back full, Linda returned to the Spokane house. The door stuck the way it used to. She walked to Elisa's room without apology. The mirror had been replaced, the vent reseated, the bed frame stripped to wood that didn't know anything yet. She sat and read the last entry again. It didn't bless or absolve. It didn't even close. It simply reminded her that one person's careful attention had outrun a machine designed to make attention feel foolish. She set her daughter's name low so it wouldn't echo. Then she put the protocol folder back in her bag and stood up because there was a meeting across town, and the chairs there needed a name on every seat. Call the work whatever you want. Justice looks like 1,000 small signatures on forms no one wanted to have to learn. It sounds like a furnace coming on in an empty house, and a voice that keeps telling the time out loud until every clock agrees. We don't control who harms, and we can't rehearse grief. But we can practice the skills that make harm obvious sooner: writing things down, sharing copies, trusting patterns over charm, moving when the signal says move. Most safety is boring until it isn't. A small, steady habit can pry open what secrecy keeps shut. And sometimes that is enough to turn a story around.